Listen up, fellow babies. It's time once again for Hold My Order, Terrible Dresser, the deep dive, history nerd, WKRP in Cincinnati podcast. I'm Mike Grasso. With me, as always, is Rob McDougall.
Hello, everybody.
And today we are wrapping up the final 2 episodes of WKRP in Cincinnati. From season 4 in 1982, today we have To Air is Human and Up and Down the Dial.
This is the end. My only friend, the end.
Before we get started in this episode, we're coming to you on Tuesday, January 16th right now. That's when we're recording. And we're both kind of collectively in shock at the very breaking news that Hugh Wilson has passed away.
Yeah, that's right. Hugh Wilson, the creator of WKRP in Cincinnati, and just a genius, a funny guy, but also, by all accounts, and at this point, I don't think there's any piece of public writing about Hugh Wilson or WKRP that I haven't read, and I have never read anything that did not say what a mensch he was, what a great guy he was. I don't know how sad it is for a man to have a great career and live to the age of 74 and to pass away surrounded by his loving family. But it's sad for us.
Yeah, it is. And for it to happen on this this recording session where we are looking at literally the last 2 episodes of the series.
This is also our 50th episode. Congratulations, Mike.
It is, yes.
Hold my order. 50. Yeah, I was already kind of a little bit verklempt, a little bit choked up just watching Up and Down the Dial this afternoon.
Yeah. Before
the news came in, and just to make it all the more perfect, I actually learned the news on Twitter, specifically from one of a half dozen WKRP Twitter feeds that I follow.
Yeah.
I learned the news of Hugh Wilson's passing from Les Nessman. WKRP quotes is the Twitter handle, but Les Nessman is the character. And that was just somehow sad and funny in exactly the way that Hugh Wilson would have appreciated.
I mean, absolutely. And I think what you said in our tweet response to it was, well, Les got this one right. And I think that was again, simultaneously sad and sweet at the same time. So we should probably let you know, we're not going to go too deep into Hugh Wilson on this particular episode because it literally, this news has just crossed our desks over the past 3 hours. So we're going to take some time and use our final episode 52, to discuss Hugh Wilson's career, his helming of WKRP, what he did after WKRP. There's a lot to talk about there. And, we'll give Hugh Wilson his just due.
Yeah, absolutely. For now, just Godspeed, Mr. Wilson, and thanks.
And may the good news be yours.
Well, Herb, what do you think? What we have here is a commercial for Suds shampoo. Shampoo that's exclusively marketed to the hip black customer. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Then why are we looking at a picture of this really idiotic-looking white man?
Well, we're going to start off tonight with the penultimate episode of WKRP in Cincinnati. Wow, that's something, man.
Here we are, yeah.
The title of the episode is To Air is Human, but Rob, I think you and I probably both best know this episode as the Soul Suds episode.
The Soul Suds. My hair's laid back and so am I with Soul Suds shampoo. Yes.
I will tell you that the first basically 3 to 4 minutes of this episode are just enjoying the aesthetic attack of seeing that legend, Venus Flytrap of WKRP says, my hair is laid back and so am I, with this great picture of Frank Bonner in full barbecue regalia. Couldn't look much whiter to get right down to it. And
kiss the cook.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's one of those images I remember really, really clearly from childhood.
It's so good.
It was probably my first sort of dawning awakening of the white guys drive like this, black guys drive like this kind of trope in pop culture.
The scales fall from your eyes and you realize, oh, we're not cool. But oh, what a wonderful, just the cold open at the beginning of this episode. I've been looking forward to this episode a lot.
Yeah.
And I think in retrospect, it was largely, it's not a terrible episode, but largely on the strength of the first 5 minutes.
It's just, it is joke after joke. And I'll tell you something, as funny as the Frank Bonner image is, as funny as Tim Reed's response to this having his name on it all over town in every grocery store. Gordon Jump is the reason why this first scene crackles. I mean, if this is a goodbye to us having Gordon Jump in the sort of original WKRP. This is a great episode for him to showcase his comedic talents.
I think this is, it's our last classic big guy office prop comedy, really.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing builds. The beginning is so good. Herb goes in. We see the stand-up and the standee, or what that's what it's called, the standee.
Yeah.
The standee, not just one, but the room is filled with them. There's a forest of them. And you sort of, like, you take in the humor of the image, you take in the quote, you sort of gradually realize how bad it is for WKRP. And then, Mr. Carlson plays it. So why are we looking at this picture of this really idiotic looking white man and just toying with him a little bit, because he's so mad. We can't even tell how good the shampoo works on you because you got a hat on. And then it just all builds, because then Venus comes in. And until this point, you've been thinking about how bad it is for WKRP, but then you see him and he doesn't say anything at first, and you realize, it's much worse for him. And then he just screams and charges.
It's probably like the third or fourth time Venus has charged Herb at some point during this series, and probably the best of them all. It is a great cold open. It is classic for a reason. And, we could talk a little bit later about sort of the cultural sort of meaning of like a Soul Suds type product. But let's get to what happens after the cold open, because I think after that, this episode loses a lot of steam and probably isn't really the funniest episode that they've ever done. But there's some great material in here. This error with the printing where Herb took 50 pictures of Venus and one picture of himself in his barbecue regalia, and the printing company chose the one of him in his.
Chose the one of him. This is a WKRP theme. Is they're so good at the vagaries of media and communication, failures of communication, like that they would get the wrong picture on the roll and make that into a stand-up. Is just like Johnny not being able to hear God's voice, it's garbled, or all the jokes with people phoning in and the contest that nobody could win. That sort of the failure of communication and of media is a reliably funny thing on this show.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like the idea that it seems obvious to Herb that he either crossed out or checked off the one with him in it. Like, don't use that one. So, I mean, really, honestly, okay, Herb could have done better in this situation. That's kind of the plot of this episode kind of unfolds with the idea that we think that maybe the big guy is actually going to finally fire Herb.
Yeah, but this is why the episode deflates a little, because, of course, we know the big guy's not going to fire Herb. And not only that, Herb knows. Herb, like, it's almost meta. Herb knows. He's not worried. He knows that the big guy's not going to fire him, which leads to some funny Herb being a cocky jerk. But I actually think it deflates the premise. We've talked before about the sort of existential horror of the sitcom character who discovers he's trapped by the show's premise and he can never leave. But here, Herb has figured out that he's protected by the premise of the show, that no one can ever fire him.
Well, we'll have to bring this back up when we talk about Up and Down the Dial next. But yes,
because there's
now, absolutely.
The sitcom characters are not completely protected. There's one thing they can't protect themselves against.
And how about yourself? Do you think you should be fired?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I do. I mean, they won't do it. Carlson's a marshmallow, and he's too nice for the job.
I would fire you.
No, you wouldn't. I mean, you couldn't come in here every day and stare at this empty desk. Am I right?
Well,
Fire him, Bailey.
So we kind of move on through the episode, and the big guy and Andy manage to negotiate with the Soul Suds client, Mr. Sherman, and say, okay, well, listen, we'll eat the costs, everything will be fine. But Herb gets sent over to Sherman's office by Jennifer.
Well, she's trying to save him. This is another way you can tell that he's not really going to get fired is that it's the big guy who's pushing for the firing.
Right.
And even Andy you can tell that Andy's trying to soften it a little bit.
Yeah.
But then, Jennifer intervenes, and rather than send Herb to Mr. Carlson, she sends him to talk to Sherman. And it's really Jennifer's screw up, actually.
That's kind of what this boils down to, is that Jennifer, in her now pretty much in character dedication to Herb and making sure he doesn't get fired, making sure that he doesn't get in trouble, she goes too far.
Yeah.
And she basically puts Herb in a situation where he has to go and negotiate with this client. And for the first time, Herb walks into this office and discovers that this guy, Mr. Sherman, is blind.
Yeah.
But he doesn't believe that he's blind. It's so difficult to explain.
Well, it's not really clear what's going on. At first, he's trying to figure out if he's blind, and then once he knows he's blind, so this is the other reason the episode deflates, is that it becomes a whole different set of things. It's about the comedy, so-called, of Herb being
obnoxious to the visually impaired, basically.
Obnoxious to someone who can't see. And then they do keep you a little bit, they keep both Herb and the viewer a little bit on your toes as to whether or not he can see, because he somehow senses, I mean, it's not that hard to sense that Herb is a jerk, but he senses what Herb is doing.
All of his exaggerated body language is probably wafting air over towards Mr. Sherman, and so he's able to kind of come back with a obnoxious Tarlik-esque finger guns kind of thing, you know?
Yeah. And then Jennifer, realizing that she has screwed up, like, why did she think sending Herb there was good? Like, since when has that been the good solution to anything?
It's kind of like the whole, you go over there and apologize right now and you make this better kind of thing. And it's kind of
it's a little bit like a reverse of the Gonzer thing, because it's like Herb followed by Jennifer instead of Jennifer followed by Herb.
Yeah, exactly.
Because then Jennifer goes over to try and romance the guy, and that's supposed to be a joke too. Like, oh, wait a minute, how can she romance him if he's blind?
Right.
But then they have this interaction where
she charms him, basically.
She charms him, yeah. And it's fine. I don't know. This whole part, what did you think of...
Well, it reminds me a lot of, I think it was Mile in My Shoes, when Andy goes to the rootin' tootin' Texans sort of office to, like, try to negotiate with him. The show never really does great when it goes outside of the station to... like clients. Like, there's a few exceptions, but most of the time it really just kind of, you're right, it kind of deflates the characters that we love. It kind of dilutes them with these guest stars who, I mean, we've had great guest stars. I mean, Hotel Ocean View was packed full of them, Real Families, all that stuff. But like, whenever there's a client situation, it really just kind of drags and kind of goes flat. I mean, this season we've seen Jennifer in The Will that had some great guest stars on it as well. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's old comedy, right? Like going to the client's going to the client's office and like trying to negotiate a deal. It's kind of hacky. You know what I mean?
And then in this case, they're sort of trying to thread the needle or I don't know, get the 7-10 split between, on the one hand, having a bunch of like cringe comedy at how awful Herb is with this blind guy. Like, you could imagine Larry David getting into the same kind of trouble with a blind character,
but about 100 times funnier, because they'd be willing to go that extra mile,
because they'd be willing to make it cruel and harsh.
Yes.
And then on this, they also want to kind of give us a bit of a message about the blind, and the guy playing Sherman is himself blind, an actor, Tom Sullivan, who is blind and played blind roles on a number of TV shows. He was on Mork and Mindy. He was on MASH.
Oh, yeah.
But he's also kind of, since then, he's kind of like an inspirational speaker.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of inspirational speaker didacticness in the scene with Jennifer, I thought.
Yes. No, absolutely. I mean, I think what this kind of gets to is one of the things I was thinking we would talk about in this episode, which is we're at the point now, this is another Hinge year kind of thing. We're at the point now where you can't just make, you're right, you can't just make a joke out of a handicapped character on television. And at the same time, there's a tremendous impetus to, make them into kind of like an object lesson for the non-handicapped, for the able viewers. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
whether it's a moral lesson or a, hey, you know, they're just like us kind of, you know, heavy-handed, tone-deaf sort of view of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that whole scene with Jennifer, so this is not like a case where, as we sometimes do on this podcast, I'm like cringing or upset about the kind of political incorrectness of the past. It's more, it's in that moment where it's kind of messagey.
It's going to be telegraphed.
Yeah. And so
it has to be more obvious so that the audience at home can kind of understand what the object lesson is supposed to be.
Yeah. I also think there's a missed opportunity. What it also means that they steer away from the racial angle of the whole Soul Suds thing. I think it was maybe we'll talk more about Soul Suds, but wouldn't it, if you would have doubled down on that and had the president of the Soul Suds company be black?
It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the president of a black beauty aids and cosmetics company to be a blind white guy.
A young blind white guy. You know, he reminds me of Andy Samberg.
Oh,
That's
sure.
right.
Yeah. I can see that. Yeah.
But historically, black beauty products, that's like historically one of the first black entrepreneurs are like sort of in that industry, you know, some of the first great black entrepreneurs. Him being a white guy means it's just about, oh, Herb, you're a screw up. But, you know, part of what makes that stand up funny is the racial thing.
Yeah.
And,
Venus and Johnny have a really good exchange in the booth. I really laughed pretty.
Yeah, that's the first scene right after the beginning. And that also is really good. Yeah.
I mean, he's, again, Venus is really just worried people are going to think he's some kind of masquerading white guy on the air or something like that. I guess that's the ramifications of this.
Yeah, well, because that's a worry that Venus has. I mean, this has come up before too.
Yeah.
You sound white, man. And Johnny says, well, first he plays the Soul Suds ad, which is pretty beautiful.
Soul Suds radio ad is great.
Ad, yeah, with Venus.
And you can kind of picture the way they describe the standee that didn't get made. He's in a tuxedo. He's holding a bottle of shampoo and he's got perfect hair. And it's like, you can kind of picture him standing in that sort of like, velvet drapes behind him. And he's kind of like selling you the product.
Yeah, exactly. And then Johnny says, well, first he says, you got to stop using this stuff. and then he sort of says, well, you're finished as a black man, but he suggests all the there's plenty of opportunities for a white man. He could get a job in the Reagan administration.
Go into country and Western music, it's and then Venus lands a nice solid punch on Tarlik's face. It's great. You know what else I really love about the Soul Suds standee is how out of focus the shot looks. Like, Herb's kind of blurry because he's gotten blown up, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, I could totally see, like, he hands the Polaroid to Lucille or whatever and, like, says...
Yeah, it's a snapshot of Herb's camera. You blow it up to 6 feet tall, and it's going to be grainy as hell.
Great.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, like you were saying, the racial aspect kind of gets underplayed in that final part of the episode because it is essentially a Herb and Jennifer episode, and it's about... Herb the screw up. He's been doing this all 4 seasons of the show, and here he is. Jennifer tries to help him, and she inadvertently sets into play all the stuff we just talked about.
Yeah, but so they really do. They lampshade the idea that nobody can get fired.
Yeah,
Herb says it. He says no, he won't do it. Carlson's a marshmallow. Andy's too nice.
Yep.
He even dares Bailey to pretend fire him.
She can't do it. And if there's anybody she's going to be able to fire at the station.
Yeah, except she threw matches at him. She could fire him for make believe. And this is how Jennifer even says it herself. She tells Sherman, "Oh, we hire people that couldn't get a job anywhere else."
I mean, did this seem strange to you? Like she was talking about Herb like he was handicapped? Because when I kind of listened to it, I was wondering if that was like an intentional or not, sort of like her trying to plead the case to Sherman that, listen, Herb needs a little help too. You know what I mean?
It's weird because of course Sherman, his whole thing is he says, well, because I'm blind, I have to be twice as good. I have to be a perfectionist. Yep. I got to work harder.
That's true.
And Jennifer somewhat unconvincingly says, oh, I do too, because I'm a beautiful woman. And so we have these 3 comparisons that blind person, attractive woman, and
a Tarlik.
screw up, Tarlik, yeah, and we're sort of like it's a little muddled, and I think that you're right that the key is the emotional through line that Jennifer is now fully in Herb's corner, and is saving him. And it's kind of fun with the rest of how she plays the big guy, because he's like raring to all set to fire Herb.
Yep.
And she diffuses it by first sending Les in to talk to him about the metric system, which is not even something a bee that Les has in his bonnet. Jennifer plants that. She says, "Oh, he wants to talk to you about the metric system," and then shoves him in there for like. Tells Mr. Carlson they've got a 90-minute appointment, and it ends up being the whole rest of the day.
Yeah. And there's a sort of bookend of this traveling salesman who's come through both offices, and sort of basically comes back at the end of the day, and Jennifer throws him into the. He's got a new brand of staple remover, I think, that he's trying.
Yes, right. She runs into him at both offices. He comes back. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Jennifer is uncharacteristically fallible, and in this episode, she screws up by sending Herb to see Sherman. She's also kind of flustered by she's got to try and get past Sherman's receptionist.
Oh yeah.
And who had a weird. A freeze frame thing. The receptionist's name is G. Tammy Beeler. She's got a little desk plate, and it just seemed like a specific enough name that like I googled it, but nothing came up. But
maybe it's an anagram.
It could be an anagram for like I met a gerbil or something like that. But
the metric marvels, Meter Man, Liter Leader, Super Celsius, and Wonder Grab. Metric superheroes, fighting to stamp out metric ignorance and introduce the system that rules the world.
So the joke on the show is that it couldn't be much worse than to be stuck in an office for 90 minutes with a nerd talking to you about the metric system. So I thought
you're stuck with us now. So
you're stuck with us now. Let's talk about the metric system. Well, because yet again, this throwaway joke is in a lot of ways a story of the hinge years, as we call them, the Carter, Reagan, 70s into 80s, and the whole story of why my country uses the metric system and your country doesn't, Mike, all dates from exactly this period.
Yes, I mean, it was Jimmy Carter, right, who had kind of, or at least the Carter administration had put the wheels in motion to make America metric in the late 70s. Now, of course, when Ronald Reagan comes into office, none of that disgusting European metric system is going to stand in the early Reagan years, that's for sure.
Yeah, the metric system it's weird. It seems funny to say it, but it seems funny for me to say it, maybe not for you, but it is this 70s thing. Like, it's not originally a 70s thing. It actually comes from the French Revolution.
Yeah.
It comes from the French Revolution and, their effort to systematize everything.
We kept the weights and measures, but we threw away the 10-day week.
Yes, right.
Each named after a different flower.
Thermidor. And, but then, in the late 19th century, there was sort of a worldwide push for metrication to go with globalizing of trade, and it was the kind of thing that like sort of Victorian age boffins and nerds got worked up about, like metrology and measurements. Yeah. And I think it was kind of the metric system is French in origin, and I didn't look this up, but I believe it was like the constellation. England got the prime meridian.
Oh, sure, yeah.
They got the Greenwich meridian and the time zones. So France got the meter. Yeah. And the meter's an actual meter. It's like this bar of metal in Paris.
Yeah, before they could use it, before they could determine all those measurements by using vibrations of atoms, and they basically just had to have a standard gram, a standard meter, and the great thing about the metric system, and I know a lot about the metric system. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But the great thing about the metric system is that all of the sort of distance, mass, and volume things are all kind of interchangeable. So if you have a cube that's like, I forget what it is, 1 decimeter by 1 decimeter by 1 decimeter, that's going to have a certain like amount of weight in it if you put water in it.
Yes. yes, a liter is the same as a liter of water. Yeah, is this much is the volume is the same as the weight. And no, it's extremely scientific and European, and everything fits into cubes and modular. It's a very IKEA-esque.
You're not basing your unit of length on how long the king's foot is, or anything.
The king's foot, or no, exactly. Metric system. So the metric system was around for hundreds of years, but then there's even like a treaty of the meter. But Canada and Britain also were holdouts, right?
It is called the imperial system for a reason. The imperial
system for a reason, that they were not going to adopt this French chicanery. And I think that it was like England, actually, apropos in these days of Brexit, England was going to be kept out of the European Trading Union in the 1960s. And so right around like the late 60s, early 70s, England and the United States both capitulated and said, okay, it's time to...
Which is also when they decimalized their currency as well, so...
Right, yeah. Yeah, so England switches over in like, I don't know, 1970, 1975, and Canada switches over at this point. And this is what I remember sort of as a kid, like, oh, you like Canadian late 20th century graphic design. The metric system has this adorable logo. The Canadian, the Go metric symbol for Canada. It's sort of an M with a maple leaf, and it's adorable anyway.
It was a team of 50 graphic designers, all hired by the government to perfect that logo, right?
Exactly. So that was on everything. I got all these like rulers and books and cereal boxes and all this stuff to sort of switch us over. And the United States was going the same way. Congress passed the Metric Conversion Act of 1975.
So under Ford.
Yeah, to coordinate the use of the metric system in the United States. But sure enough, as you said, Reagan comes along and, he's not having it. It's a way to, save money and also be sort of, belligerently nationalist.
Sure. And now we and Belize, I think, are the only countries that use the imperial system on a regular basis. I mean, you'll still see mile markers and miles per hour in Britain. You won't see it you'll see it in Canada on like a dual sort of thing near the border, I think. Is sometimes
yeah. And there's a weird kind of a generational hangover where, depending on how old a Canadian is, they might, they know their height in imperial, but their speeds in kilometers, or they know Celsius. Basically, the younger you are, the more metric you're going to be.
Yeah. I my wife is British. We have arguments about Celsius versus Fahrenheit all the time. And in fact, I think that's what Les says near the end of the episode. Is like, we've got to go to Celsius.
He sells them on Celsius. Yeah.
Yeah. But I want to talk about sort of like my history with this, because I think I'm in a similar boat to you as far as like getting the metric system sort of like implanted in me at an early age, because I was sort of kind of fascinated by the metric system at the age of about 8. I think I was in 3rd grade, and I think I must have taken this book out of either the school library or the town library. It was written in 1976, in time to get us ready after that Metric Act.
There you go.
It was a sort of a cartoon children's book called Meet the Meters, and
yes, of course it was.
It had that great mid-70s sort of like cartoony. You know what I'm talking about?
I do know what you're talking about. Now, if this were Canadian, the only other thing is that this is also right around the time of sort of a real push for official bilingualization. So it would have been like, allons-y, meet les maîtres.
The Meters were a family, Hector and Millie Meter, and their dog Killer Meter. And the description of the book says, they explain the metric system, reference sections, and conversion cards are included. And boy, I tell you, you put a conversion card into a book back then for me, and I'm hooked on it, basically.
Joseph of Arimathea, 17 conversions.
My 3rd grade teacher was kind of like, I think this is one of my most focused memories of grade school. I think there was like a parental meeting, like an update meeting, and they said, do you know your son is very, very excited about the metric system? And he's trying to get all the other kids in class to understand what the metric system is, because he took this book out of the library. This Ford administration era book that like told me to get ready for the metric system 7 years later in 1983 is kind of like, well, it's a little too late for that now, Mike, but thanks anyway for the attempt,
Someone had to break it to you. Like, oh, I'm sorry, Mike.
I don't think this is going to happen, Mike. Sorry.
And thus your animus to Reagan began.
Probably, yeah. If somebody had told me that it was all his fault, I probably would have been like, you ruined my favorite book.
You know, another reason for you to like the metric system, and also just another sort of like way in which it fits into this kind of, you know, this wonderful imagined modular bureaucratic utopia, is that they use the metric system on Star Trek.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's a good point.
It's sort of like a sign of like, well, of course, by the 23rd century, we'll use the metric system.
Good job, Gene. I appreciate that. That's an excellent choice. But yeah, since then, I've never had quite the same fervor I did at the age of 8, because really, who does? You know, like
who does? Yeah.
Yeah, so we mentioned this a little earlier, but hey, Soul Suds, right? I mean, first of all, great name for a product. I mean, I'm kind of pleasantly surprised that the staff of WKRP was able to come up with an evocative name for a black hair care product.
Yeah, that's good. Soul Suds. My hair's laid back, and so am I. What it calls to mind, I mean, there's a whole world of black hair care and beauty products. As we said, that it's a shame that the owner of Soul Suds wasn't black, because going back to the 19th century, where there were kind of like, what's her name? Madam C.J. Walker.
Yes.
Was sort of like the 19th century Oprah, you know. She was like the first, I think they always say that she was the first self-made, something like the first female millionaire or the first self-made millionaire in America as a black woman, C.J. Walker, who sold.
Yeah.
And then Soul Suds also makes me think, of course, of Afro Sheen, which was the perennial sponsor of Soul Train.
Soul Train, yep.
Right? And so every episode of Soul Train begins with an ad for Afro Sheen hair care products, and that's another kind of classic black business.
Yeah, I mean, this era is kind of like liminal as far as black hairstyles go too, right? Because like, you know, we've been through sort of like the very natural 70s, right? Where growing out your afro was like a political statement, you know what I mean? And we're heading into the 80s where, again, like products like Jerry Curl are going to be coming out and sort of becoming more and more popular. Stevie Wonder did a lot for doing your hair up in beads, sort of Caribbean style, and sort of like there's all these different ways to express yourself. Dreadlocks as well, as far as, you know, sort of a Jamaican sort of, you know, Rasta kind of thing is concerned. And so like there's a lot more diversity in black hairstyles in this early 80s period than maybe there was 15 or 20 years before this.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, again, once again, this is a subject on which we are not really experts, but we do try and, you know, pay attention and do our homework. And Afro Sheen is interesting in that respect, because the company, they got their start, I think it was called Ultra Sheen. Anyway, originally the product that they made was a hair straightener. So your hair would look less African American. And then in the 60s and 70s especially, they became the sort of preeminent maker of things for sort of natural, what they called the natural
look.
You're going to die of natural causes, Tim Reed says to Tom Greason. And then, you're right. As we get into the 80s, we have it goes in all different ways.
It's kind of one of those things where, like, I always have a good chuckle in any of the flashback episodes of The Simpsons, because they always make sure Dr. Hibbert has a period-specific black hairstyle.
Yes,
he's got the afro in 81, and he's got the Stevie Wonder beads in 84, and the high top fade for when Maggie's being born in 1990.
That's right.
It's, you know, again, those writers and producers are white too, but, you know, again, like
whereas both Venus and Tim Reed, I feel they've got their style. They're going to stick with it. He's not trying so hard as Dr. Hibbert.
Ironically, it is kind of conservative by this point in 1982 to have that sort of like medium length afro, neatly trimmed beard. You know what I mean? It's kind of a classic look by this point.
Yeah.
So.
Haven't you forgotten something?
Say who were... Hey, aren't you Frederick Douglass? Yeah, we studied about you in school yesterday. About how you were a slave and how you took your own freedom. and then began to fight for freedom and dignity for all our people. Say, but what did I forget?
Are you going to go out into the world with your hair looking like that?
Well, Mr. Douglas, you know, times have changed. We wear the natural now.
You call that a natural? That's a mess. I've been watching the progress of our people, and I'm quite familiar with the natural. And I'm also aware that it is worn as an outward expression of pride and dignity. So haven't you forgotten?
Right. My Afro Sheen comb easy and hairspray for Sheen. You know, I can dig this getting my fro together.
My sentiments almost exactly.
Oh, hey, who is playing in the booth? One of our final musical moments of the series and the podcast.
Yes. We've had plenty of Billy Joel, but now we get to hear my man, Huey Lewis and the News.
And I think we talked about this when the poster first appeared on the wall, but like Huey's from the Bay Area and so is Howard Hesseman, and I'm wondering if he says the name like he did for the Tubes with a lot of like delight, and the Do-Rocks for that matter, you know. That's
right. He gets a nice full plug, and the song that they're playing is Do You Believe in Love?
Oh, what a jam. It's so good.
It's a great song, and it's pre-sports, right?
Sure.
It's not, so it's like one of Huey's first hits. This is if you're thinking American Psycho, this is the early work that is too new wave for Patrick Bateman's taste.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, sports is only like a year and a half away at this point. You know, it's coming up there.
You can still tell, you can sort of still hear the DNA of Elvis Costello's band, because the News, you know, were Elvis Costello's backup band Clover make up most of the News other than Huey Lewis.
I did not know that.
There you go. Little Huey fact for you. Well, here we are, folks. I hate to say it, but all good things must end, and we have arrived at the final episode of WKRP in Cincinnati. It's called Up and Down the Dial. It aired on April 21st, 1982. And in this episode, the ratings book has come in, and WKRP is doing great. They've moved up to number 6 in Cincinnati, with Johnny and Venus both at number 1. But the celebrations are cut short when this guy arrives claiming that he's been hired by Mama Carlson to become the new news director of WKRP.
Yeah.
Andy goes to investigate, and it turns out that Mama Carlson has decided to change the format, to change WKRP to a 24-hour news station.
Would you care to read the last paragraph of the recommendations chapter?
No, I would not.
Well, then I'll read it. WKRP's top 40 audience is at its peak. The sound quality of the AM signal cannot compete with FM stations. If WKRP is to remain profitable in the long run, we recommend changing to a non-music format. All news.
So the celebration doesn't last very long, and this ends up being, very appropriately for a final episode, a really kind of elegiac, here we are back again to the beginning, and here we are at the end, and all of this is ending kind of an episode. Now, at the 11th hour, the axe does not fall. Yeah. It's actually Johnny who figures out, in a really interesting scene with Mama Carlson, she makes a speech about pluses and minuses, and Johnny figures out that WKRP is not supposed to make money, that it's kind of a tax write-off for the rest of Mama's business interests.
Yeah.
He figures this out, sort of confronts her with this, and rather than tell Arthur this, what would be devastating news, she relents and lets the station stay the rock station. And that's it.
It's kind of a stunning scene, that last scene. I mean, not to jump ahead, but like, the more I think about it, I mean, first of all, you get to see Johnny meet Hirsch, which is just like one of these pairings that you really never expected to see before the end of the series.
And then as soon as you did see it, you're like, how did I go without it for this long? It's so wonderful. And we want to talk about all the callbacks in this episode, but it's so great that Hirsch gets one last great, two actually scenes.
Yeah.
Madam does not believe in handouts. No.
No. Just tell her Johnny Fever dropped by for a little chat.
Johnny Fever. You're the DJ who's caused her so much discomfort over the years. Please make yourself comfortable.
You must be,
The houseboy. I'll interrupt Madam's meditation on the veranda. It is Dr. Johnny Fever.
Yes.
Madam, your physician is here.
I mean, he's in his apron sharpening knives as Johnny comes in.
Really long blade. That's when Andy comes in. When Johnny comes in, he's on the couch with a snifter of brandy.
Oh yeah.
And he also gets to say, he's telling Mama that Dr. Johnny Fever is here. So he says, Madam, your physician is here, and then runs off.
Yeah, a lot of callbacks. But that final scene is the way Johnny just kind of deduces it. I mean, I think there's been enough hints dropped over the course of the entire series that we could figure out that Mama never took the station very seriously. And as we can see from current events, putting your relatively incompetent progeny in charge of a business that's on the periphery of things is kind of a common thing among American industrial oligarchs in this day and age. So really what the big guy has been doing the last 4 years is presiding over a business that was never meant to succeed.
Yeah.
And Mama never had the expectation that he would succeed. But ultimately, Andy Travis's arrival back in 1978 has set the stage for this amazing turnaround that's kind of ruined Mama's plans from all along.
Yeah, it's kind of wonderful. Like, I mean, you can pick nits about like whether this makes financial sense, really. Like surely a business that makes money is better than a business that loses money.
Yeah.
But if you accept the setup, she gives this very vague explanation about pluses and minuses, and sometimes if you play the minuses right, they can be pluses. And Johnny, who is drunk at this point.
Yeah, there's a lot of drunk work in this episode, folks.
Johnny immediately cottons to what's going on, and he says something like, "This is so deeply warped that even I get it." And he immediately gets it completely.
It's a con, yeah. I mean, it's basically a long con, yeah.
But whether it's realistic financially speaking, it's actually a marvelous revelation because it makes everything make sense, right? Yeah. It makes the whole way in which Mama runs the station. It makes Arthur's job make sense.
Playing Andy against the union, like it all.
It makes the fact that Herb and Les never get fired make sense. It makes the fact that she's so cheap make sense because she doesn't want to put more money into it. It's just supposed to trundle along, and so it's actually. It's kind of beautiful, and it makes the plot of the whole series about this struggling radio station. It ties it into the kind of central family dynamic of the Carlsons. It's really good, actually. I think it's a really now what you do. This raises the question of was this meant to be a finale? Did they know it was going to end? Where would you go after this? Because I don't know what you do after this reveal.
Yeah. I mean, that could be us just sitting here 35 years later saying it's the perfect ending because it's what we're given. But at the same time, you're right. Like, what this does is it cuts off any possibility of any future Mama big guy conflict. Because again, like, the big guy doesn't, you're right. Like, Johnny makes sure that he doesn't reveal it to the big guy. But at the same time, like, it's obvious to the big guy that, he says something about a mother's love. Johnny says something about a mother's love at the end there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's interesting because what I think the biggest sort of journey that's happened here is that I think Mama kind of respects her son now. And I don't think that was the case for the first 3 or so seasons of this show.
Yeah, I think that's the way I want to read it. I think you could read it another way, which is that and the new WKRP is kind of, like I want to declare that apocryphal because the new WKRP begins and the station's still they're still a failure. Nothing has changed, right? In fact, they're back to where they were at the beginning of the first season. But in that moment, she's filled Arthur's head with all this talk of, oh, you have to be number one. I want you to succeed. Yeah. And then when called on it by Johnny, she's like, okay, Arthur's done what I never thought he could do with the help of these people. I should embrace that and let him do it. Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of wonderful.
You don't understand, and I don't expect you to.
No, I understand. Believe me, this is so deeply warped, even I get it. KRP is not supposed to make money. That's the deal. We're set up to lose, but we didn't. And that's why you're changing the format, so you can lose money for 2 more years.
Good night.
You're telling your own son that you want him to be the general manager of the #1 station in the market, and you'd be happier if it was 16th. How do you think he'd feel if he knew?
A very interesting turn, don't you think?
I mean, what it gets me thinking of, though, is what we were talking about, sort of like all these callbacks to... There's just so much continuity in this episode. It's ridiculous. It's like, and it's not just like overt plot arc stuff like the big guy and Mama. There's little references scattered throughout this episode to past episodes of the show.
Yeah, let's see. So there's the ratings book. The book comes in.
Yeah, that's Baby if we ever wondered.
Yep. It's very reminiscent. Andy in his office, and he seems all upset at first. It's a fake out, but it reminds us of that episode. Yeah. Hirsch, of course. There's even just Johnny sprawled out on the couch, I think you mentioned in the notes, right? It's like the pilot.
It's like the pilot. Yeah. I mean, when he first comes into Andy's office, I'm the morning guy, and this stuff keeps me sharp as a tack.
When Les thinks he's going to lose his job, what does he do?
He tries to climb out the window.
Yeah, it's his go-to.
They have a mention of the doomed dancing duck promotion that was mentioned in Real Families.
The dancing duck promotion. They refrain from mentioning turkeys, but they mention the dancing duck promotion. Yeah. They go party at the Cricket to celebrate, where they toasted Johnny when he was leaving to go to L.A.
Bailey wants to go out on strike. It's like a reference to I Am Woman and the union.
That's right. And Herb gets stuck with the bill. Didn't he get stuck with the bill?
Oh, he got stuck with the bill on I Am Woman. That's right, yeah. Oh, that's great. I didn't even notice that. I mean, literally, like, guys, we've been spending the last 3 years of our life with this show. If we can't pick out all these references, I mean, we're going to be pretty useless to you if we can't at least manage that.
Yeah. No, even the sort of what is on the surface, I think, a fairly pointless scene, which is the scene with Charles von Sanker, the new news director. Yeah. It kind of recapitulates the pilot because he's like Andy, right? This new guy showing up
to be the director, essentially.
To be the director. And Andy scoffs at the fact that he's from Fargo. And Mama says, "Where the hell are you from?" And he's like, "Santa Fe."
Yeah, that was a really good touch. I love that guy, by the way, because he looks like every unctuous early 80s TV anchor possible. He's got the sort of helmet of hair and the sort of beige suit, He looks totally evil. Like he's the summation of like every radio consultant that Mama has threatened to hire. Oh, the consultant. There's another episode that gets referenced.
Right, sure. The nightmare of the consultant and the loss of they've always been worried about the loss of their rock and roll soul. Although, I mean, if he was a little bit more likable, you could almost imagine this. This is like the pilot of a show.
It's a backdoor pilot. Yeah.
Like it's the timing doesn't work out, but like
news radio.
If it was Dave Foley. Yeah. If that was news radio starts with Dave Foley arriving as the new news director.
Yeah.
In 1982, I think he'd be like 12, but or at least he'd look 12. But
So, Dave, what are your goals here at WNYX?
Well, I just want to be the best damn news director I can be.
Good. That kind of strong language don't fly with me, but you got your own style, I guess.
I'm sorry.
Dave, I considered, 30, 35 people for this job. Most of them had more experience than you, but you want to know what made you so special to me?
Oh, what's that, sir?
What? Huh? Well, make it fast. I'm in the middle of telling the guy why he's so special to me. No, it's work-related.
Yeah, and I think that kind of gets us talking about like the one historical topic that we can talk about in this episode. And we've mentioned it before, but the shift of AM radio from broadcasting music to doing news and talk. I mean, that's that very prescient and very sort of like up to date of the WKRP writing and production staff to know that this trend is going on out there in 1982, where stations that used to broadcast music are starting to shift because FM is just taking over all of the music broadcasting out there.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we've talked before about how WKRP it's sort of more based on the freeform FM stations of the 70s, but there were through the 70s into the very early 80s, you could still listen to rock music, pop music on AM radio.
There also were a lot of beautiful music stations still on AM. I can remember them from my own childhood, and they never bothered to move because they were already on their way out. And the other thing that we should mention is that in the consultant's report, one of the reasons why Mama is so anxious to make the move is because it says you will not make money for the first 18 months, which is keeping with her sort of like historic mission to make sure that the station is not too much of a money winner.
Right. They have actually foiled Mama's plan by succeeding in spite of themselves.
Yeah.
Which Jamie Weinman's blog has a great little discussion. There's some back and forth here about how realistic this whole deal with Mama wanting the station to lose money is.
Right.
But you remember we talked about the unproduced episode, Another Merry Mix-Up, the one where Mr. Carlson thinks he smokes pot?
Right.
So Weinman quotes a few lines of a script from that episode, and in it, the specific thing that Carlson is talking to Mama's accountant about is the unexpected profits that WKRP is having, and the accountant is complaining about that. He says showing a profit where one is unexpected could have tax repercussions all the way down in the lingerie division. And Andy says, "We have a lingerie division?" And Carlson says, "Oh boy, do we." But the
Carlson Industries, yes.
Carlson Industries. The joke is, so there was this foreshadowing in this unproduced episode earlier that the WKRP is not supposed to make money.
I mean that makes me think that they have to have been purposefully seeding this in episodes leading up to the end of this is a serialized, this is the thing it's the missing link. WKRP is the missing link between non-serialized and serialized television. Because,
it's practically like Lost.
Well, I want to talk about that because, we've talked a lot in the last couple of episodes of the podcast about how a lot of these final sort of character-centric episodes are becoming a final curtain call for the characters. So who really gets the focus in this episode? Well, it's Andy, who we began our journey with all those 4 years ago. And it's Johnny, the breakout character, with his flash of insight probably bestowed upon him by drinking, as we remember from Fish Story.
Yeah, of course, Johnny functions so much better when he's drunk. Yeah.
And the big guy and Mama. And these are kind of the characters that really were at the center of the pilot, now that I think about it.
Yeah, we return.
Johnny is the one who gives us the bursting forth of the new format. And, of course, the big guy is literally the sort of first person that Andy has a detailed conversation with after Jennifer. So it makes sense that we kind of end with those four characters. And then, of course, everybody else bursts in drunk into...
And we return to, the key moment in the pilot is Arthur standing up to Mama.
Yes.
So we return to that relationship, right?
Yeah. But this time it's kind of flipped because it's Mama's heart who's softened. The reason why this final episode is reminding me of the almost universally maligned final episode of Lost, which I'll tell you something, as the years have gone on, Rob, I was really a huge Lost fan. I would say, I was talking with somebody on Twitter this past week about, Lost and kind of like reassessing it now, like almost a decade after it's ended, and sort of like thinking to myself, well, it went astray in a lot of places, but I'll tell you something, the emotional connection that I had with that finale has grown over the years. And of course, if you haven't seen it, spoiler alert, it takes place in basically a waiting area of the afterlife where all of the people on the island get back together again. And they're kind of repeating the same mistakes they made in life, kind of, and trying to get out of that cycle of basically, purgatory or whatever.
Yep.
And I think to myself about all these callbacks we were just talking about, Les almost jumping out of the window and Bailey wanting to go out on strike and her being a screw up. these are the curtain calls. These are the little sort of like character touches that remind us of all of the things that these characters have been through. And again, another reason why I have to imagine maybe there was just a tiny bit of a knowledge amongst the writers and the cast that maybe this would be the end.
Yeah. Yes. I think that, again, it's hard not to project onto this, but I do think they knew at some level this was the end. Officially, this episode, would have been made in March of 1982, February, March of 1982. Yeah. It aired, as I said, April 21st. The Castle book talks about the last days of the show, and they got the word, so they left for the summer, not knowing.
Yeah.
But anyone who works on a TV show knows that, the axe can fall at any time. And it was about a month or so later, it was in May of 1982, that they got word that they weren't coming back. But it sounds to me, reading the Castle book, like they certainly had the idea that they might not come back.
What's the title of the season 4 chapter? I'm Exhausted?
I'm Exhausted, yeah. The ratings just weren't getting any better. Yeah. The show kept moving around, and when they filmed production order, the last episode to be filmed was to air as Human. They filmed them out of order, but on the Thursday rehearsal to air as Human, so the day before the last filming day, the entire cast came and did the rehearsal in tuxedos and evening gowns. And I've
seen those shots.
Yeah, there's these lovely pictures of them all. And this was a sort of gesture of respect and love, I think, from people who could read the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
And I feel like when you watch the episode, like the scene that just tore my heart out, really, is the sort of, to use the same word, elegiac, almost funereal scene in the booth with Venus, Johnny, and Andy drunk in the booth. And Arthur comes in, and I just feel like they're saying goodbye. I feel like that is they're talking about, well, it was a nice run while it lasted, but nothing lasts.
Yeah.
I just can't watch that and think that they're not talking about the show.
Yeah. That sort of mood is even before we get word that there's going to be a format change to news. Like, Johnny and Venus especially are really cynical about the book. Like, they have their initial sort of, hey, I'm number one with women 18 to 34 and everything. But then you're right. Like,
look what I'm doing with teenage boys.
Boys, yeah. Yeah. They repeated that joke. There's another one that they used to get. But like, the kind of excitement that Bailey has about going to lunch and like getting everybody together is great. And it's very in character for her, but everybody else, that enthusiasm kind of dies out because they're old hands at this business. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And again, another great metaphor for being a TV actor.
Yeah, and you live by the ratings and you die by the ratings.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how that must have felt for them, because that's why the Castle book has a kind of, Castle interviewed most of the actors years later, and Hessman, and to a lesser extent, Tim Reed and Frank Bonner, they all kind of think, maybe there was something political about them, about the show. Maybe the network never wanted them to succeed, like Mama, But Hugh Wilson just sort of shrugged and said, we didn't have the ratings. That's why shows get canceled.
Boy, he again, like on an evening like tonight, but like his approach was always really, really pragmatic. Like, he knew he had to write a stupid story about a guy in a pig in a fish suit, so he put a pen name on it, and like,
and how, speaking of that, on the slapstick, what's the final shot of WKRP in Cincinnati?
It's a pie in the, more like pie in the lap, not pie in the face.
It's a cake in the chest, but it's basically a pie in the face. Yeah. That's how we end it, is just
it's set up really well because Les, for some reason, puts his tape recorder in the middle of the floor, leaving something for Herb to trip over. And I got to be honest, I liked the pratfall of Frank Bonner out of
the
Andy's
second
office
pratfall, right?
Even better than the one with the cake. So it's like, but you're right, like that could be just another great callback, basically, to the end of Fish Story with the paint.
End of Fish Story with the paint. Mr. Carlson sitting on the pie. Just Wilson, sort of like, this show is so sweet and so sensitive at times, but also, yeah, it's slapstick. It's a little song, a little dance, a little seltzer in the pants. That's all they're doing here.
Yeah.
But we were getting really good reviews and had a nice little buzz about us. And even though we didn't have big numbers, they stuck with us. And we stumbled through 4 years. Then they had a chance to, a new guy, Harvey Shepard, came in at CBS, who I think was a new broom wanting to sweep clean. And he decided to get rid of us and keep Alice, Kiss My Grits, Alice, which just infuriated me. And no, I don't want to say anything mean about anybody else, but they weren't in our class. I didn't think. Harvey canceled us, and then I was so delighted. The show went into syndication and just took off. And I was delighted too because, Harvey's a very good fellow, I'm sure, but it really proved that he had made a dastardly, stupid decision.
I thought in the final scene of the show, one more callback, something I had been meaning to say basically for the whole fourth season of WKRP was to ask whether you had noticed how much more preppier Andy's clothes were for most of season 4.
Oh yeah, we talked about that in
oh, that's right. We did talk about that in
Love, Exciting and New. Love, Exciting.
Yeah, it's all sort of, instead of jeans and Cincinnati college t-shirts, it's all sort of tight slacks and polo shirts and
a lot of sweaters. A lot of sports jackets. Yeah,
but in the final scene, maybe because he's about to have a cake put on him, Andy is wearing tight blue jeans right out of season 1 and a Cincinnati, actually a WKRP t-shirt.
Yeah.
And then Bailey is wearing some flouncy
That's right.
Season 1 Bailey dress with like shoulder flaps that sort of flap up. Was that a callback? They were just going back
digging through the costumes, went all the way back to season 1. I tell you when I was watching the final set of scenes with Johnny at Mama's mansion. Howard Hessman aged a lot in these 4 years, didn't he? I mean, we talked about that a little bit last time out with the refilmed bits of the pilot.
Yes.
And how well they did to make his hair look like it did in 78. But I was looking at his face and it was like, wow, his beard's almost entirely gray now. And like he's putting on a little weight. And it's like, he looks really different than he did in the pilot in that final episode.
Yes, there's a good scene in this episode where he says, he's poo-pooing statistics, and he says, statistically, anyone who's lived like me should look totally wasted. He takes off his glasses and you see the years. Yeah, no. If you see that first, you go back to the pilot and the famous scene where he becomes Fever.
Yeah,
he looks so fresh-faced there in comparison.
Yep, absolutely.
There's some 4 years of I feel much the same way. Like I've aged the same amount in the last 3 to 4 years.
I have a feeling Howard probably lived pretty well in those years between 78 and 82. I think Howard he probably had some fun.
Yeah, some Riptide-esque exploits or something.
Yo. It's 7:30 p.m. here, my children. This is Venus on KRP, for a while at least.
So did she say how much profit is enough?
She just kept tapping this thick book as if it had all the answers.
Statistics, right? I don't trust them. Statistically speaking, anybody who's led the kind of life that I had should look completely wasted.
So there is money in news. I don't want any part of that.
No money. She ain't gonna make any money for at least for the first couple of years. Come on, she's gonna lose her skirt.
I'll tell you another statistic. Did you know, supposedly 3 out of 4 teenagers in America today think that Chuck Berry was the host of The Gong Show.
Here we are, Mike, at the end of the series. How did you feel coming to the end of it all?
Well, okay, I'm going to have to kind of divide today up into 2 portions. The one before I found out that Hugh Wilson had passed away and afterwards. I mean, I watched the episodes this morning, did my usual notes. Up and Down the Dial was really, really kind of hard to watch, actually. Like, I know you mentioned at the beginning of this episode talking about sort of watching it now with the knowledge that we've lost Hugh Wilson, but like all of the callbacks and sort of all of the sort of well-meaning kind of curtain calls to all these characters. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty hard to watch because I know we both know we're not really going to, I mean, you know, new WKRP aside, we're not going to have any more rediscovery of this series at this point. And it's a little weird.
Yeah, it's weird. It's absolutely, it's sad. You know, I don't want to be a bummer. I think that there's this pathos mixed into the comedy all the way along.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But certainly, you know, you watch a sitcom like this and these people, it's cliche, it's maudlin, it's banal, but they become, you know, they feel like people, you know, they feel like a family.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, mostly I just kept thinking, oh, I'm going to miss these guys. I'm going to miss these guys. I know I got the DVDs. I can watch it anytime I want, but I do feel like, you know, we've come to the end of a journey with them, and everybody's going to go their separate ways. There's almost a way in which, like, because I'm projecting this onto the episode, that scene in the booth where they're all sort of essentially saying goodbye feels more real to me than the happy ending denouement. Hey, we're having a party. Actually, we're all going to come back to work tomorrow and it's going to be exactly the same.
Yeah.
Because in the fictional world, maybe they did come back to work, but
we're never going to know.
We never get to see them. We didn't. Yeah. So the Castle book, like I said, Castle quotes, you know, he talked to all the actors. Hessman and Reed and Bonner all had really positive things to say about the show, but did feel like they'd sort of been misused by the network.
Yeah.
But Gordon Jump, he says, and this was him telling Hugh Wilson, he says, you know, Hugh, aside from the money and the ability to go to work every day as an actor, the tragedy of all this to me is that 8 people who genuinely love each other are no longer going to be able to bring to life these magnificent written words. I'm really sad because I feel I've lost a family. You know, leave it to Gordon.
Yeah.
To just be earnest and sweet and wholesome.
Yeah. That's, wow. Yeah. I think I had read that in the book. You know, it didn't have the same impact when I was reading it back in middle of season 2 or something like that. I think the other thing about this experience in this podcast, Rob, that's kind of maybe not unique, maybe these days it's unique, but kind of going through this series basically at the same speed you would have watched it back in 1978 to 1982. I mean, we spent 3 years on this. The series is 4 years long, but when you get right down to it, like, we didn't binge watch this. We
really didn't binge watch it, and I know I didn't, and I think you're the same as me. I didn't go much ahead. Like,
I flipped ahead a couple of times just for reference's sake, but I didn't. Yeah. I didn't watch full episodes. I didn't watch, you know, sort of in a string, you know, a few episodes from a season that was coming up. But, you know, going through this, like, you know, again, we don't watch TV like this anymore. I mean, for the most part, we were able to kind of download an entire season, watch it all at once. I think this was kind of a great sort of exercise in patience and kind of taking your time to enjoy something, because having the time to kind of watch and process all these episodes, do all the research and really kind of learn where the episodes came from. I mean, it just made it just all the more sort of rich and special.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now you guys just watched the last episode, okay? Had anybody seen it till tonight? Did he? No, I haven't. First time. Any twists you would have liked to have seen, or was it exactly what you...
Georgie, tell the truth, man. I taped Seinfeld. I don't know.
Oh, really? All right.
Jay, we'd like to say something to our friend Kirsty, who obviously didn't see the tape before she taped that. So go ahead.
You'd all like to say something to Kirsty? All right, Kirsty.
Wait.
Kirsty, you know, you are my best friend, but we all need to say this to you.
Yeah.
You're
stupid!
Let me explain to the audience at home. This is what's known as losing control. Seeing it here, 11 years, pent up.
Daddy, that was funny though, man. Thanks, man. You were rolling, baby.
One more way in which WKRP is sort of liminal or at a hinge is that TV shows didn't always... For a long time, TV shows didn't have finales.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because they just got canceled and ended, and that was it.
Yeah. Gilligan never got off the island.
Gilligan never got, well, except in later TV movies would sometimes be ginned up to sort of solve those situations. The finale as an event that everybody knows is coming and then they make a big deal out of it. It wasn't much later. I mean, I think the finale of MASH is still, because of the way ratings work, it's still one of the highest rated TV programs ever.
And that would have been 83, if I remember correctly. So right after.
So like just a year after this. But of course, WKRP was never, it was not the prestige national treasure that MASH was.
Mary Tyler Moore's finale might be considered probably the first real emotional one, because they have that big hug where they all hug and then they kind of scoot over together because they have to get a tissue and they have to scoot over together.
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of always replayed on the sort of like greatest hits of, television history, and I think that, but MASH was an event. You're right. MASH was, I think, a 2-hour event, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well, then this is the danger of that is that when I think of series finales from the 80s and 90s, most of them are kind of like overhyped, unrewarding sort of letdowns, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, are you thinking of Seinfeld, or am I just...
No, that's near the top of the list. But, I think you could tar Cheers or Friends or,
I kind of like the Cheers finale. I mean, mostly because I remember them being on The Tonight Show afterwards, and every cast member was completely blotto. Like, they were all drunk. So that was kind of a fun memory. I mean, even the episode itself is, it's another Sam and Diane kind of will they, won't they run off together kind of thing. But I love when Ted Danson comes back to the bar and just kind of quietly closes it down.
Yeah.
It's pretty well done. And it's definitely more minimalist than a lot of the other sort of finales that, that Seinfeld finale definitely, definitely was a controversial one, let's say.
And then in the latter, modern prestige serialized drama.
Sure, the dramas,
finales are a big deal, but very often, just you were talking about Lost, in the moment we tend to judge them on the basis of how well the mystery was solved, like whether all the puzzle boxes were opened. And I think this might be why, what you said about Lost, that seemed so disappointing at the time,
has grown in the years since then. Yeah.
Right. They dropped a lot of those spinning plates that they had appeared to have such good control over.
Yeah.
But you look back years later and the emotional stuff is maybe more important to you than what was the meaning of Secret Code X and,
and then we kind of get to the sort of era of like, final episode of Sopranos, which really did very intentionally leave things on a very ambiguous note that caused people to talk afterwards.
Right. Sort of sheer refusal to satisfy the urges of the fans.
You kind of have to respect it at this point. Another situation where people were kind of furious when it first happened, but now it's probably universally considered one of the best TV finales ever.
Did you ever watch Life on Mars?
The British one?
Either one.
Well, I mean, I know the American one had kind of a weird ending to it.
The American one had about the craziest fucking ending of anything I've ever seen. So it was not a good show, but I admire it for its audacity. You know what, folks? Just Google it. We'll put it in the show notes. It's just like you wouldn't believe me if I told you.
Yeah, no, that's true. But I mean, closure is one of those things that like, I think we've become really used to it in pop culture, especially television. We kind of expect it. Like, if a TV show becomes an institution, we expect a nice sort of neat wrap up. We want Don Draper to write the, I'd like to teach the world to sing ad. We want Walt to kind of go out in a blaze of glory against the Nazi meth dealers. We want all of these kind of, nice pat endings. But I mean, if there's one thing that this WKRP finale has told us is that life goes on outside the frame of the show. No matter what show you're talking about, these people are going to go to work tomorrow after this near disastrous finale. Like they're going to, those lives that we've kind of speculated on what seasons 5 and 6 of WKRP could have been, the only place they're going to ever exist is in our imagination, or in sort of the dream library where all of the unwritten seasons of television shows reside,
Yep. We riff on the idea of sitcom characters being trapped in the premise. It's like I just read the novel Lincoln in the Bardo. The Bardo is like this Tibetan liminal space between life and death. It's like limbo or purgatory, and they're trapped there. And at some point, we have to release them. We have to let them go.
After talking about Tommy Westfall and the snow globe last time out, I mean it's kind of. It's a metaphor for television. It's a little box that sits on our, and in fact, as I looked back at the clip of Tommy Westfall, the dad puts the snow globe on their big console television at the end to kind of like,
nice.
And it's just like when Captain Picard traps Moriarty in his little box, and Picard says, maybe we're sitting in a box on some, weird computer somewhere far, far away. And it gets us into the realm of metafiction and everything else. But like, the television shows that we love, I mean, we enter into them for a short time and then we hopefully disengage from them at some point. And, that's kind of the magic of this podcast, Rob, is the fact that we were able to go back and revisit something we remembered very faintly from decades and decades ago.
Yeah. And then to overlay those 4 years onto the last 3 years of reality.
Well,
in ways that were sometimes hilarious and sometimes horrifying, but I certainly I don't regret the journey.
You don't regret the journey.
I'm trying to end on a positive note here.
Mrs. Carlson, I'm tired of your crud. I got 4 things that I want to say to you.
Travis.
Number 2.
Mommy, I don't think we've all had a chance to get together like this before.
WKRP in Cincinnati will be back after this.
So while this is the end of our look at WKRP in Cincinnati's episodes, it's not the end of the podcast. We've got 2 more episodes coming in the next 4 weeks. Episode 51, our next one, is really going to be all about you, the folks who listen, the folks who have written into us. By this point, you've probably sent us all your cards and letters, so thank you for doing that. We're going to talk a little bit with our former guest hosts, bring them back into the mix and talk with them about WKRP and anything else they want to talk about. And then our very final episode will kind of just be Rob and I looking back at everything we've talked about over the past 3 years, sort of the series, our favorite episodes, your favorite episode. We're going to do a Twitter tournament of basically, we're going to determine the best episode of WKRP using your poll results.
Yes, by conclusive scientific proof of what is the very best episode.
That should be fun.
I want to talk about whatever became of everybody, where are they now? I want to...
Sure.
We need to step back a little bit and try and see it from 30,000 feet.
Yes, I mean, we have so many occult correspondences that have happened since Turkey's Away that we're going to need to kind of go into in great detail. So expect a little bit of that in any event.
And that'll also give us a chance to eulogize Hugh Wilson more adequately than we could tonight.
Yes.
Although in a sense, the whole damn podcast is our tribute or our eulogy to Wilson.
Boy, what can you say? I mean, it's hard to talk about still. It's just happened, and it's still, I don't know, it's still rough. Sorry, I went off.
No bummers. We don't want to end on a bummer.
Well, maybe this is one of those points, Rob, where none of us want to, have the sort of closing credits crawl up over the screen, and we're kind of hanging on for hanging on's sake. But, I'll just say it now, and I'll probably say it again in a few weeks, but this has been a fantastic experience, start to finish. It's just been so much fun. I mean, it's been fun to talk about this show. It's been fun to talk about it with you and all of our great guest hosts. And really, like you said earlier, it's been great to kind of just get to know all the WKRP fans out there who found us one way or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The confluence of the final episode and Hugh Wilson has put us in a little bit of a somber state, but damn, this has been so much fun. And how many laughs have we gotten out of the show, and how many laughs have we gotten out of the podcast? And so, yeah, this has been a hell of a great time.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you, everyone. And we will be back in 2 weeks with some wrap up. What else can we say?
Thanks, everybody. Talk to you in 2 weeks. Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back soon with more WKRP riffs and memories. If you like this well enough to listen to the whole thing, tell somebody about it.
We're online at holdmyorderterribledresser.com, which, believe it or not, wasn't taken. We're also available on iTunes, and we always appreciate your iTunes subscriptions, reviews, ratings, and downloads. So get on there and give us some stars.
Good day, and may the good news be yours.
If you've ever wondered whatever became of me, I'm living on the air in Cincinnati, WKRP. I'm at WKRP in Cincinnati.
You know, the great pleasure of doing this podcast has been having the chance to talk about WKRP at length, not just with Mike, but with all of you and all the other people who are out there who love it and dig it and find it fun and find it funny. So anything you want to say about WKRP in Cincinnati, about Hold My Order Terrible Dresser, about the late, great Hugh Wilson, let us know. We would love to... Wait, is there going to be time for after this?
You're right. If they're hearing this episode, it's probably not going to be quite in time. But we're planning to have a best episode of WKRP tournament, sort of a March Madness kind of thing. We're going to probably hold that on Twitter. Again, people are probably already... Yeah, you're right. Shit.